And to culture wars. Today's examples range from the idiotic to the sinister. And a question, at what stage do people stop kowtowing to these bullies and just laugh them off the stage? Why do so many people cower to these crazy people? Let's start with pop megastar Justin Bieber. He's under attack in the press and on social media for his hair. Not for this pink rinse, but for his recent new kind of dreadlocks. And the media left is again going nuts, horrified by what it calls his supposed cultural appropriation for stealing a hairstyle from African men. It's almost as if Bieber had actually scalped some poor African and then put on his hair. Joining me is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australia, author of the excellent novel Corkscrewed, a lightly disguised autobiographical tale of a fabulous advertising genius. And he's also host of Outsiders on Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m. Rowan, tell us about cultural appropriation and why it's supposedly a racist sin.
Well, first of all, Andrew, I think in my novel I culturally appropriated myself, so I think that's the that's the way forward. Cultural appropriation is this idiotic. It's pure idiocy. It's this idea that cultures are fixed, and that if you belong to, it's the ultimate in neo-Marxism crap. I'm sorry to use that word at 7 o'clock in the evening. But the idea is that you belong to a fixed culture that has fixed symbols, its hair, its music, its food types, and they are it. You belong in that tribe, you are cemented into that, and that never changes. And you will always belong to that, and nobody else is allowed to have any part of that. Now, this is such a complete contradiction to everything we were told about multiculturalism, about the beauty of, and the richness of different cultures, and how the great idea of globalism was to bring cultures together so they could learn off each other, so that they could fuse their ideas. Remember all that fusion food, for example, fusion art, fusion music, where you could learn, take a bit of this, take a bit of that, borrow that, and create something new, which is how the entire biology of the planet operates. Fusion equals borrowing equals getting the best out of each other and moving forward and creating something even better and even more perfect. And yet the neo-Marxists want the opposite. They want to contradict nature, which we know they want to contradict nature. We've seen that in other examples, particularly gender fluidity, but they want to contradict nature, Andrew, by saying that you cannot blend. If you like something, a food that someone else is eating from another culture, you can't eat that. You can't wear your hair in this particular style. You can't do that because it's offensive, because it doesn't belong to you. This, as I said, is so brain dead it defies belief. But it is taught, no surprise, in our universities and in our schools. Now, what we know, Andrew, and it's the oldest cliche in the book, is that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So if you really like something, if you really envy something, if you really admire something, you think that's really cool. And pop music and pop culture has been borrowing from each other, from world music trends, going right back through some of the greatest pop music, Elvis Presley, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, etc., all borrowed from the blues and rhythm and blues, all borrowed from African music or certainly plantation music, and that was borrowed from something else, and you go back through Creole, you go back through all sorts of things. And at each stage, people have loved playing a certain instrument or heard something else and thought, wow, if I fused that and melded that with my thing, then I'd come up with something new. That is how we've gone forward. That's how we've progressed. And here's the real tragedy, Andrew. So Justin Bieber is doing exactly what every musician has done from all races, from all creeds. He's just borrowing just simply a look. But here's the tragedy. His latest album, Justice, actually plays samples of Martin Luther King making his speeches. This is an album designed to sort of bring people together and give us the best of Martin Luther King. And of course, he's being attacked by the neo-Marxist left.
It's so freaky. I mean, you're so right about cultures rubbing against each other and learning from each other and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if it only goes one way. Was Louis Armstrong culturally appropriating what wasn't his by playing a trumpet? Duke Ellington culturally appropriating by playing a piano. It's a cultural appropriation today. When an Indian stars as David Copperfield in the latest remake of one of Dickens' great English classic novels and a film of it. And when even woke newspapers now promote hair straighteners for women of colour with afros. Straighteners even used by stars like Tara Banks. Is that cultural appropriation? White hairstyles? And when black soccer stars dye their hair blonde. Is all that cultural appropriation, Rowan? Have I missed some sort of loophole in this law?
It's a massive loophole, and you've identified it. It does only go one way, of course, because if you accused, Viv Richards of cultural appropriation for playing cricket, because traditionally that was culturally invented in Britain, you'd be howled down. It only runs one way, and like all these sort of trends of the woke left, they are really just a fake facade, a phony intellectualism designed to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to denigrate white Anglo-Saxon Christian, Judeo-Christian culture, to denigrate it, to play it down, to attack it. And that is really the only game in town. So whether it's cancel culture, cultural appropriation, whatever it is they're doing, the game is all unconscious bias. The game is always the same: to denigrate and dehumanize whites. And this is why it is so insidious, and this is why, although we laugh at it and we joke about it, and it's great to joke about it, and it's great to mock it, and to mock it to the people who take this stuff seriously. But the bottom line is incredibly sinister.
People got to realise, why is it that Western culture has been so dominant and so attractive and spread into countries that aren't Western themselves? And it comes from one of the things that's been so successful in borrowing from other cultures. Western Europe borrowed philosophy from the Greeks. It borrowed religion, Christianity, from the Middle East, right? It borrowed some mathematics, algebra, from the Arab world. Whereas the Arab world was almost like, we're not going to have some of this stuff from the West. We're just going to, not even print all this nonsense from the West. How few books are printed from the West. And that has been the difference. And now we want to go back to that kind of model, free, frozen in aspic. I just don't get it. Now, we are actually weakening ourselves with this ideological nonsense. In fact, people of the left, Rowan, global warming alarmists, could be weakening themselves physically as well as mentally. The popular recipe site Epicurious says it will never again publish another recipe using beef because farting cows and belching cows are a big source of global warming gases. And Epicurious says our shift is solely about sustainability, about not giving airtime to one of the world's worst climate offenders. How long do you think before eating meat becomes a climate crime?
Well, they're trying to do that. The hypocrisy is staggering, of course, because, for example, in New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, man who preaches global warming and climate change rubbish all the time, managed to exclude New Zealand's cattle from their consideration. So the hypocrisy is just staggering. But the first thing about Epicurious, this is good because I will never go onto their website ever again, and I would advise anyone who's remotely interested in food to immediately delete them, have nothing more to do with them. Cancel culture can work both ways. If you're stupid enough to sell yourself as a good food thing, sorry. If you want to go down that route, great. The rest of us are going to ignore you, and we hope you go broke. I'm sorry, but that's the only way we can fight back against this nonsense.
Rowan, I think this will be a classic example, like the Oscars, which plunged to their worst ratings in their history. They're as woke as all get out. Go woke, go broke. Precisely. Why would you go to a website which cuts out a major food source? Why would you do that? Exactly. Rowan, China is now turning this woke cultural revolution against us. One of its generals, I mentioned him at the top of the show, Major General Jin Yinan. He's a professor at China's National Defence University. This week attacked Australia's racist, said critics of China were Anglo-Saxon whites and Christian whites who thought whites should be the leaders of the world, when he clearly thinks that Han Chinese should be leaders of the world. Doesn't it show really that the woke are the useful idiots of the Chinese dictatorship?
Very much so. And, you know, the reality is that, as I said before, we can laugh at all this lefty lunacy and so on, but the reality is, like the dripping tap, it is doing serious damage. It is gradually just undermining our foundations, rotting our foundations from the core. And our foes, or those who would choose to see us harmed, or choose to try and, get one over us, will relish in this. And the left,
they're exploiting it. They're not just relishing in it. That's my point.
Exactly.
They are exploiting it, Rowan.
Precisely.
And I was also struck. Bits that haven't been reported in the papers today. I had a look at the full comments that he made. This Major General who's teaching China's future military officers. I was struck by what he said about meeting professors at the Australian National University, Australian Defence Academy, when he visited it, 9 years ago or something. He said they were telling him Australia's part of Asia, which we like to say we're part of Asia. And he said, he responded aggressively. He said, no, you're not. You are not part of Asia, the Asia Pacific. That's a different place, right? And you got no call to be interfering or telling people in that Asia Pacific region what's what. And he said, they were so weak, they all backed down. And he said, we got to treat them like this. This is how we got to treat them. They backed down. I thought that was a really damning little indictment.
And so revealing, and the Chinese know how to play the game. They know how pathetic so many of our academics are, not only our academics, so many of our institutions, politicians and so on. A little bit of anger and bullying from the Chinese, and yes, our pathetic, so many of our pathetic mob do back down, and I'm glad to see that Dutton and others are not backing down. No,
Peter Dutton is making a hell of a impact already. Rowan Dean, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm getting my dreadlocks done for the next show.
I thought they were dreadlocks, but there you go.